Hello and welcome to this video, and this video is going to be called Adam Neely, Peter Erskine, Jaco Pastorius and the question of what is improvisation. A few weeks ago I watched a video on YouTube with the YouTuber Adam Neely talking with two other guys who I don't know, and they were talking and comparing the track Teen Town by Weather Report with the track Dean Town by Vulfpeck. They were discussing the similarities and contrasts between those two tracks. Right at the top of the video, the first thing, which is a quote sort of taken a little bit out of context, is Adam Neely says something like, and I'm paraphrasing, you must go and see it to see exactly what he says, but he said something like many of the solos that Jaco Pastorius performed on recordings, on albums, were written out or pre-planned. This created a little bit of upset. Peter Erskine, the great jazz drummer who played with Jaco in Weather Report, then waded in, saying that of course this is ridiculous, Jaco could improvise, that his solos were improvised. It's ridiculous to say all his solos were written out and pre-planned. Adam Neely then put a very respectful response on his Facebook, saying that that Peter had set him straight and that he didn't mean any sort of offence or anything like that. Quite a mild reply, with not much content actually, defending his position. I then put a comment up saying that I believe that some of Jaco Pastorius' solos were pre-planned, and some of them were written out, and he was quite correct to say that. And then a sort of a little bit of a row then emerged from my comment. Few people taking issue to that. Peter Erskine then came in and apologised for his dismissive tone. In his original reply on Facebook, he had sort of said, who's this guy, this nobody with millions of followers on YouTube, you know, who is he, and who is he to say, have an opinion, showing a little bit of ignorance, I thought, about who Adam Neely is, and also how important these musicians are, like Adam Neely and the Rick Beatos, in actually maintaining improvised jazz music, having a forum and having a place for it still, with the recording music industry dying as it has, you know. So there's a whole bunch of things here that sort of emerged out of all this. I waded in a little bit. I felt that it was best to step away from this discussion, because I think the problem here was the definition of what improvisation was. I felt that offence was being taken where offence hadn't actually been meant in the statements. If you watch Adam Neely's video on Jaco, he is absolutely respectful of Jaco throughout the video as being truly one of the greats of jazz fusion. It echoed with me because a few weeks ago I actually put a video where I called Re-evaluating Jaco Pastorius, where I went through some of these things as well, you know, and I mentioned the fact that I felt on recordings that some of his solos were prepared or written out, that I can hear the same licks many times, and then when you listen to live concerts, you know, and he stands up and does a solo bass, you know, showcase, you tend to hear a lot of licks, repeated licks, rather than a truly improvised piece. I'm going to do a video about guitarists and bass players that I like, that I've worked with. There's a guy in the UK here called Steve Lawson, and Steve is an absolute genius at being able to sit down and play a solo bass piece which is entirely improvised, where there's no pre-planned elements or licks or written out parts, and there's a difference there. So this is what brings me to this discussion. What is improvisation and what do we class as improvisation? To try and clear up a lot of the nonsense that's come from this video, which seems to be to come from misunderstandings, deliberate or accidental, of what improvisation actually is. Right, so the two pieces that we discussed in the video were not only Teen Town but Donnelly. Now in Teen Town's case, Teen Town does not contain any improvisation. It's the through composed piece, as is stated in the video. When you're listening to it, you're listening to Jaco playing a written part. Now there's a little breakdown in the middle where Jaco does throw some licks in, which well could be improvised, and they act almost in an improvisational way in the piece. It's only a few lines and then he returns to the tune again. But I'm sure those lines are written out as well. Okay? So this is not improvisation, and Peter Erskine makes this point, and I think Adam Neely was completely aware of this point. I mean, obviously Adam Neely is one of the most knowledgeable musicians on the internet, so I'm pretty sure he knows that Teen Town's a written out piece. But there's also mention of Donnelly. Now Donnelly is a piece that Jaco became famous for playing on his first album, where he plays the Charlie Parker head on bass, and then once he's played the head in true jazz fashion, he then plays a solo over the changes of Donnelly. To my ears, with my musical knowledge, I would say that solo has a lot of prepared parts to it. I'm not saying it's written out. I'm not saying there's not bits where Jaco's coming up with stuff on the spot. What I'm saying is, to my ears, I can hear it's prepared. I once did an analysis of this solo many years ago, and I compared it to other analysis, and Jaco's quoting from different musicians, different composers. There's all sorts of things going on, which seems to suggest that it was prepared beforehand. You know, now people come on and say, "Oh, Charlie Parker and Sonny Rollins, they would quote composers and they were improvised." Yes, they did, and I can tell those are improvised. But in Jaco's case, it sounds, to my ears, to my interpretation, it sounds like they're being prepared beforehand. This comes down to the very point of somebody listening to something and interpreting it. We don't know. Right, one of the things that was levelled against me in this argument was Peter was there. He was in the band with Jaco. He should know. And I go, yeah, but no one's there when someone's coming up with a piece. You know, if I'm in a band with my mates playing and I get to do a drum solo, and it's a drum solo that I worked out the night before and I've got it all down and I play it, they're not to know. There's nothing about being in a band with someone that would mean that you are in the know like that, apart from talking to the person, you know, and finding out, and someone said, "Oh, you know, I played a solo last night." So what is my fundamental point? Well, improvisation, okay, I think has been devalued culturally. This is the big problem. It's devalued, and then in jazz it's kind of elevated. But overall, the value is really put on the sort of classical model, which is the ability to play parts, to play written parts. Okay, people believe that improvisation has less aesthetic standing. Now, why do I say that? I'm a drum teacher, and I've come across this many times with my students. Students who lack confidence and only feel confident when they're playing something that's been written down on a piece of paper. They feel that that has worth. They feel that the stuff that they are creating themselves doesn't have worth. I in fact have a teaching plan for people who lack confidence and can't improvise, where I try to get them to come up just with one improvised phrase. Then I get them to write it out, and then that is exercise one, where they play their own phrase, and I come up with another phrase, and I then write that down for them, and they go away and play that. And they suddenly are quite happy once I've written down what they're playing to play it. There's an authority that comes from writing it down. So I think there is, in our culture, this idea that stuff that improvises is a bit sort of throwaway, it's not proper, you should really sit down and work it out properly, this idea. Of course, on my channel and all us jazz lovers, I'm sure Peter Erskine and Adam Neely would both agree with me that we all think that that's not the case, right? But the problem with improvisation is once you've locked it over here, this is improvisation and this is written material, it actually narrows the concept of what improvisation is, okay? So let's go down to one of the greatest solos of all time by Coleman Hawkins, Body and Soul, right? When Coleman Hawkins recorded his solo of Body and Soul, it really set a standard that here is an improvised piece which acts as a piece of art, right? It really makes that statement. Of course, Coleman Hawkins is working towards this solo and he's developing ideas. After the solo became very famous, he then recorded it again. So his solo then becomes the piece, okay? This solo then gets picked up and people quote and play it. It becomes something else where you're playing Body and Soul, but is it still improvised? Well, it is, because Coleman Hawkins improvised it. How much did he improvise and pre-plan it? Well, it doesn't actually matter. What matters is the context in which this is being created, right? We'll come back to that. But let's just pursue the history of Body and Soul. The vocal lead singers, like John Hendricks, Eddie Jefferson, they actually take this solo and they work it out sort of note for note and add vocals to it. When I was growing up, I had a Manhattan Transfer where they'd then taken, I think it's the Eddie Jefferson version of Body and Soul, and they put it on an album where they'd done this, right? So improvisation is not as cut and dried as this is improvised and this is not, right? So when I'm teaching jazz at college, some of my students who aren't confident to improvise, they'll go away and say, well, can I work my solo out? And I go, yeah, you can. Well, will that be improvisation? Well, it's a type of improvisation, isn't it? It's improvisation, but it's composition. Now, but people are going to say, no, if they've gone and written their solo out, it's not improvisation. I believe that the two terms are misleading, and that improvisation is composition and composition is improvisation. They're one in the same thing. When Beethoven and Mozart were sat writing their pieces, right, they were created by them improvising music in their head or on a piano, right? The improvisation should be called the moment of creation. Once you call it the moment of creation, it delineates that as being something else. I think improvisation is a bad word for the most important aspect of creativity, and it's the name of the moment of creation. Okay? Now, once you invent recording with music, the moment of creation can be captured at that moment. Before then, the moment of creation would have to be written down on a manuscript, and that's the classical model of music making. Painters don't have this distinction. You know, a painter can pick a piece of paper or a canvas and paint something on the spot, and they've done this for 1,000 years. Nobody goes into the cave paintings in south of France and looks at those cave paintings and said, oh, these are all improvised, or these are all pre-planned. It just does not come up. We're aware of, when we look at those, that those two things are working together, and that's the nature of music. Now, within this, right, within music, we then can refine these moments of creation, and we can, because music's so wonderful, we can listen to it and interpret it in that way. Okay? So I can listen to Jaco Pastorius and actually appreciate his genius, because he's a soloist on record, as Adam Neely said. He's a soloist that is compositional, this is the way I described it in my previous video, is composition. He's got ideas, melodic lines, and he brings those together. You know, it's different to Coltrane screaming on his horn and trying to express an inner emotional, although I'm not saying that Jaco does not have that in his playing as well, but these are two separate things. Now within this is something that I find really interesting, and this is really what I want to get into this video and talk about. For me, with jazz musicians, there's a lot of different routes to playing jazz, and what's emerged in jazz education is the proper way of learning jazz. This is the way where you are really basing your playing around a bebop model of playing jazz. You know, you're going to learn to play through the changes using chord tones and color tones. You know, on that then you have what I call the Berkeley method, which is where you have chord scales. Then you can take chords and build scales up. That's a more advanced way of playing. And that's the way you improvise, and there's a school of thought where you go through that. Okay, so when I put Spectrum by Billy Cobham on, the reason why that album is so wonderful to me, or one of the reasons, is Tommy Bolin's on there, and he's improvising, but he's coming from a different place to Billy Cobham, who is much more schooled as a jazz musician. Okay, because Tommy Bolin is a rock musician, but he's exploratory in the way Hendrix was, where he can operate in a jazz ensemble. Isn't that a fantastic thing? And I feel that Jaco Pastorius' genius is Jaco is not like Peter Erskine. Peter Erskine to me is a drummer who has come through a schooled way of playing jazz. So Peter Erskine, I was watching a video the other day, and he was talking about the standard opening and shutting of the hi-hat. And he said it should be shut, open, open. You know, and if you go, he really was derisive about anybody who would do that. And that to me is like an ideological dogma of this is the way it should be. This is the death of music, right? We have to allow the Tommy Bolins in, and we have to allow the Jaco Pastorius in, that have come from such a different place. You know, Jaco's come out of sort of R&B background, and yet he's got this incredible compositional place, and he's got these jazz chops. You know, but I don't think he came through a sort of music college education roots. I think he came from something else. Whereas someone like Stanley Clarke is much more rooted in a jazz education. But Stanley Clarke is innovating. You know, when you hear Stanley Clarke rocking those pentatonics, you know that's come from Hendrix. Musicians are actually all, in their individuality, coming from their own place. And this is what makes music fantastic. Now, I had a run-in with Peter Erskine many years ago, only a little one online, where I made this point, you know, that jazz needs to be open to new musicians coming in, and these musicians shouldn't have to learn the proper way of playing jazz. The gatekeepers who say you have to be able to do this, this, this and this, you know, and this is somehow, then you've earned your, you know, credentials to be a jazz musician. No, we need to let these people in, and I'm sure Peter would agree that that is the case, and I'm sure he wouldn't disagree on this. The problem is when the language emerges, this sort of gatekeeping language, this is the way you should do it, this is what someone's doing, this is what you shouldn't be doing. Right? Well, as soon as you get to that point, the form is dead. All right. Anyway, that's my thoughts on this little thing. I'm going to come back to this again. I realise that, you know, just talking about what the essence of improvisation and what it is actually a really important thing. This discussion's been very valuable to me because it's made me think about these things a little bit more, and it's something that's in my mind. What is improvisation? Is it just a bad name for the moment of creation? Anyway, that was my point. There, we've said it. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you like it, then like it. If you want to subscribe, please subscribe. And if you want more of this, more philosophical stuff, more deeper stuff, please become a patron. Thanks for watching again, and I'll see you on the next video. Thank you.